Hi, today I'm speaking with Aaron Branton, who has a very interesting story about how he learned to read. So I'm just going to ask a couple questions today uh, about some of the things you told me about your experiences with reading, if that's okay.
Mhm.
All right. And first off, you told me about your impact with education, that you were both in the gifted program and special education because of your uh, reading level at that time. I don't know if that'd be safe to say it that way. So what impact did that have on like just education and your views on reading at that point? Okay.
Well, it was not helpful that it was a source of, bullying from the other kids that, why was I going to both? What, how did I trick my way into getting into the gifted class when, I was in the special ed class and whenever the teacher would call on me to read in class, I couldn't, I'd be able to pick out a couple of words, but, I was reading at a first grade level in the third grade, so it it was less helpful than it probably could have been.
So you said a lot of your early learning how to read came from the discovery of text-based video games. So how did that impact not only your ability to read but building confidence as a reader? And what were some of the games you were playing?
So by the third grade, I was still reading at a first grade level, and it wasn't for lack of effort on my part or my parents' part. I had been to basically every tutor in this part of the state. I had been through every type of possible, harebrained has a half a chance in hell of working plan on, teach your kid to read now, and nothing would work. And then I got a Nintendo for Christmas. And with it, I got Dragon Warrior, and that's a very old school JRPG that was, just had your figure moving around. Like if you ever played like Pokemon would be a more modern version of it, but you move around, you get random attacks, but all the stuff is text based. You have to be able to read it, and that spurred me to learn to read in a way that nothing else had. And by the end of the second semester of the third grade, I had improved enough that I was no longer in the special ed class for reading. I was, reading at a much higher level than even my teachers thought I should be. Like, you know, that was the semester I picked up the first book I read on my own, uh, Salem's Lot by Stephen King.
I can ask about that later. So I mean, were there other like I mean, obviously, I'm familiar with like the text-based video games, but could you kind of explain like how that works with
Well, there's very little animation to the fights. It's mostly you see the figure of the monster in that game in particular, and if it attacks you or you attack it, the screen might flash and the character might move up and down a little bit on the screen. But that's about the extent of that animation. So it's largely you go through a menu saying you're going to attack or use magic spell or an item to heal or try to run away.
Okay, so you really needed to understand to be able to read the different menu prompts and the.
Yes.
So I mean, is there like later games and stuff that still kind of do that? Because I know obviously there's more like playable like novels and that kind of thing. That is that basically the same idea or
To an extent, I mean, again, the Pokemon series is probably the going to be the most well known amongst younger people.
okay?
But the early Final Fantasy games were all pretty much like that. Very limited, very simple animations to the fights and going through menus and have to be able to read what the different commands did. Uh, it was a great way to get introduced to some very big, unusual words. Like I, of course, knew the Legend of King Arthur, but I had no idea what spelling out Excalibur would look like until I later played Final Fantasy, the first Final Fantasy game, and that was one of the swords you could get.
Huh? Yeah, I mean, I could see how something like that starts building on your vocabulary. So you know, cool. Okay, so you said about third grade or so is when you moved to a regular classroom. So how did reading change after that? And like, what did you try to read things in the school library? Did were there certain books you were seeking out that is always like, well, I heard my classmates have read such and such, or they talk about this, or I see this character I like is in a book. So
Yeah, so by the time I had finished Dragon Warrior, I was able to read basically everything that had appeared in the game. So that was a lot of the basics of everyday English that I was confidently reading. That really motivated me to want to be able to read more.
okay,
And my family's always been huge sci-fi and fantasy nerds, so I knew that Stephen King's Salem's Lot was a book about vampires, just loosely.
excellent. Yes.
But we were in the grocery store one day, passing by, the magazine book aisle, and I saw they had a copy of it, and I begged my mom and dad to get it for me, and it didn't take a whole lot of convincing, but that ended up being the first novel I ever finished on my own.
So I was a huge fan of Stephen King's work, and I would have to say Salem's Lot is probably one of the most influential of the books I read, like, even on my own writing and stuff. I mean, where did you go from there? Like,
I kind of got into a vampire kick for a while, so I read Dracula,
nice.
Interview with a Vampire,
So
a
you
couple others.
read like a lot of like paranormal kind of stuff, or like more like how does this shape your reading now? Like, what are some of your preferred genres and some of the books you've read recently, and that kind of.
I have gravitated more towards urban fantasy over the years. The Dresden Files, pretty much anything with werewolves or vampires or you know people trying to keep secret the supernatural from the normals, that sort of thing. Also, a lot of web comics that get translated from Korean into English. I've been reading.
Okay.
Uh, Still a bit of a urban fantasy draw to the particular genres of that. It's pretty predictable in what I'm going to read in the groups when they post stuff.
So you said you went from earlier on, and I think that's the thing a lot of us do, starting out with like physical books, and then like you said, you moved more into like web comics and other way. And I know you listen to a lot of audiobooks now. What was the reason for the change in the formatting of how you read, or does it depend what it is? And
Uh, Largely, I've had to move away from being able to read physical media, and in particular the audiobooks, by having a child. When you're
I don't
trying
do
to,
it.
yeah, when you're trying to keep track of, what are they trying to do to kill themselves now? Are they maiming any of the household animals? What was that sound? Like, it's very hard to pick up a book and get any meaningful reading done. So
Okay.
it's just easier to have, one earbud in so you can hear the story and run around chasing the little hellion.
So I mean, because I think you said too, you sleep listening to audiobooks. See, that's one of the things I can't really do because I would feel like I would have to listen to the entire thing every day because it'd be like, I have no idea what happened. Because
Well, it's mostly stories. Like for the past year or so, it's a selection of two or three different Lovecraft tales from the Cthulhu mythos.
nice.
Um,
So would
so
you say H.P. Lovecraft is one of the things that you kind of as like one of your standbys, or?
It's just something I'm familiar from reading it so much in high school that it's more of a I know what's going to happen, so my brain isn't like invested in trying to stay awake to like what's going to happen next. And my brain's like, okay, and next is going to happen to this, and next this is going to happen, and then I'm asleep.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of the familiarity of, like, well, I guess that makes sense because there's a lot of people that reread the same things over and over again. Like, I know I have certain times of the year that, like, people at work ask me, like, recommend a Christmas book. And all the time I throw out Nosferatu, and people are just like, what? Uh, the Joe Hill book. I should say it takes place at Christmas, and it's the psychic vampire thing, bringing children to Christmas land, and it's a terrifying book, but it's a Christmas story. So it's just certain things like that I think I know for my own reading and stuff. And like it again, going back, like Salem's Lot for me is usually like a fall read. I don't know why, but it just feels like there's certain times, that you draw back to, familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, so Lovecraft and some things like that. Is there anybody else you feel like you revisit a lot, or like?
Not as much as I used to, but for a while, having the uh, audio version of Lord of the Rings was my go-to for going to sleep.
Oh man, that feels like that would probably go on for forever.
Well, again, it's another story that I know so
Yeah.
well that it's my
So you need like
brain's.
the audio version of like the Tolkien dictionary as well to be like,
Yeah,
eh,
it's more the familiarity that my brain doesn't feel like it needs to fight to keep awake with that one. It
okay.
was a beloved childhood, well, teenage memory, and it ended up being useful that I was so obsessed with it at the time and reread it so many times that it's now something that listening to it with my eyes closed can put me right to sleep.
I feel like we've touched on this one a little bit, but how has your current interactions with reading like been shaped by, your whole reading journey and the early experiences?
Well, given that it was an RPG that gave me the kick in the butt to get started being able to read, and the fact that I was constantly exposed to sci-fi and horror movies and discussions between my parents and brothers when I was a little kid, I still heavily gravitate towards fantasy, urban fantasy, horror, sci-fi. Sci-fi horror is a particular favorite of mine. Cosmic horror. Uh, those are all the old comfortables. Like even expanding out into other fields. Like occasionally when I'm trying to find stuff for you to enjoy too, and I'm looking at kind of racy books, it's still supernatural themed.
Yeah. All right.
So
So I know you have a 4-year old. How are you teaching her to read? And, like, are you going to go about some of the same kind of strategies that worked with you? Or, do you note something different in her personality that you may think will work for her? Or, like, where do you go from all there?
well, it's still
Still
yeah,
early to tell?
it's still early to tell. She's shown a great interest in books. She's you know there are multiple members of her immediate family that read to her on a very regular basis. Uh, it's just that's still like if I think she needs the extra help in any way, I'll bend over backwards to do it. So like I think it would be absolutely wonderful if she learns to read from say playing a Pokemon game or something.
Yeah. And I mean, that's already things that she's shown she's interested in. So,
Yes, so
you know,
it's not
I,
like it's going to be hard to
yeah.
pique the interest.
That's why I think it's cool that, like, I would say comparatively now to, just knowing like library resources and whatever for like stuff our age and stuff, there's so many more, like even on our like kids computers and stuff, like reading games with, recognizable characters, or, whatever, that it's like kind of seems like it, can't think of the word I want, but it kind of is like this extra like implementation to, okay, let's play it on the computer over here, and we learned about how Pokemon does whatever you're supposed to do. Now let's get a book about it. Let's get a video about it. Let's get that it just seems like it's so much easier to present like a whole reading like package kind of thing versus for us it was like I remember there was like early, some games out there and whatever, but it like nothing that was really. I still can't think of the word I want. That kind of goes, hand in hand with okay, the whole. You know what I'm trying to explain?
Yes.
Does that make any sense?
Yes.
So, is there anything you feel you would do differently, or I mean, since it really seems like you started out with a very like I don't want to dumb it down and say it's like simplistic way to come into reading, but it was like you know, and then it's just like caught fire, so to say.
Well, that depends. If you're talking about with what I know now being implemented back then for me, I would say maybe skip the hours and hours of traveling to every little town and city in Louisiana and Mississippi looking for tutors that promised the magic cure that the school systems couldn't give.
Yeah. Well, I think back then too. Just everybody like I don't know if it was just kind of wanting to simplify everything. I mean, I know with like my own struggles with school and stuff was because I didn't get diagnosed with any of the disabilities I have till much later. So it was like, okay, they didn't, you know what I mean? So I don't know if, your situation was anything like that, that it was just kind of like, hey, if somebody would have put their finger on the right thing and been like, here's the problem, you know? But
There's a possibility, but I don't know. I think it was just finding the right thing that would motivate my brain to be like, hey, I can do this.
yeah,
And it was
by making it fun or
by making it something that would borderline trigger the special interests that my autism causes me to deal with.
okay.
So I became obsessed with the game. I had to know what was going to happen, what you had to do next, where you had to go next, what was this person saying, how do I get through this fight? And, you know, I could get mom or dad to take, a couple of minutes to help me through, like reading what the fight was doing and figure out what to do every once in a while, but they weren't going to sit there the whole time I wanted to play.
Mm-hmm.
They still had their own stuff to do, so it was really the motivator of, I could pick out, a couple of words beforehand. I was reading at a first grade level, so it wasn't like I was going from zero skill to proficiency, but I just had to brute force my way. I figured out a lot of the next words to come by context of, I can pick out enough words in the sentence to figure out, well, this probably means something about that, and from there I could like dissect the word and do the things that the teachers had always been telling me to do. Sound out the word, spell it out in your head. Okay, what does it mean when you put these letters together? And it was just like a light bulb going off in my head. Like, it's like I went from struggling with basic word, a lot of the basic words, to suddenly, oh, I do know that. And it's just, I instantly was reading it. There was no thought. There was no trying to figure out what it was after a while. It was just required the proper motivation.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for talking to us today and sharing your experience. And yeah, it sounds dumb to say, well, good luck in your reading adventure or something after that. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say, but you know, uh, good luck with whatever comes next,
Okay.
So, all right, thanks.